Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to walk through some examples of how capstone questions evolve through the process. So here I have two examples of real capstone questions and then how they evolved and changed throughout the process and what were kind of some of the factors and context to those changes. So the first one is from a student who had a pretty clear idea of what she wanted to do for her capstone. She had had a relationship with Special Olympics in her home state and knew that that was something she was interested in pursuing for her capstone. So she created an initial capstone question. So this is from her Form A from 771 that she developed. And you can see here, it's how does the participation in team sports, such as Special Olympics, impact the health and well-being of adults with intellectual disabilities? So again, she kind of had a pretty clear idea about, the site she wanted to work with, the population she wanted to work with, and was starting to really get a sense of what she wanted to look at or focus on with this population and this site. So if we move down here to her literature review the next semester in 772, you'll see that the question pretty much hasn't changed that much. This is directly from her literature review that she talks about how the paper investigates how participation in team sports, such as Special Olympics, impacts the overall health and well-being of adults with intellectual disability. So moving along to her proposal, which she developed in her third year. And so just as a reminder, folks have 2 semesters, 2 courses where you'll be working on putting together your capstone experience and project proposal, sometimes referred to as Form D. So by the end, in 774, when she submitted her proposal, for approval before she began. Again, her question has pretty much stayed pretty similar. So again, how does participation in team sports, such as Special Olympics, impact the overall health and well-being of adults with ID? And so, at this point, she had she connected with the Special Olympics in her home state. They were on board with having her there. There was identified site mentors for her. And so she had some conversations about what she was going to be doing, and they were on board with this focus right around health and well-being, and identified that as a need they had with the organization. So what's interesting here is towards the end, and so this is the final capstone objectives. And these are directly from her final poster presentation. You can see there's some shifts here, right? And the reasoning behind these shifts is once she had conversations with her site and site mentors and knew the organization well. Again, she'd been a longtime volunteer with them and knew a lot of the programming they offered, that sort of stuff. However, when she started her capstone, she was really able to dive in more depth around a needs assessment that really looked at what were some more, I guess, specific needs around health and well-being for participants in Special Olympics. And so being able to really, work with the participants in this context, really get to know the organization from a different perspective than just being a volunteer, she really was able to hone in on some more specific questions and objectives that then shaped her final project. So you can see here from her objectives, she really identified that one of the barriers that participants were experiencing and the organization was experiencing was difficulty getting feedback from participants. And this is a common thing for people with intellectual disabilities, that often surveys and other sorts of measures like this aren't accessible. So she identified this as a problem within Special Olympics, and her site mentors agreed and also identified this. And so she really set out to then look at best practices for creating accessible patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs, for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to assess, health management and activity barriers. So again, I think you can see clear links to her interest in health and well-being, and obviously the population and the site stayed the same, but really, again, she was able to really identify a more specific kind of question that built upon the information that she had been gathering through her literature search, literature review, and proposal development. And again, the second question is, again, linking this to occupational therapy. So she wanted to look at kind of these accessible survey measures, and how what she did could, be an implication for other OTs or the field around how to utilize these in practice with people with IDD. So again, I hope this kind of illustrates how these questions take shape throughout the process, and they don't stay the same, and they don't have, rarely do they not take on some different characteristics and components, right, based on how the capstone evolves. And so going back up to the top here, there is a link to the students' final capstone project, so you can see their presentation and their poster in more depth if that's of interest to you. And I think just a final note too on this one is that, so their project really focused on again creating this accessible survey and helping Special Olympics better assess participant experiences and the barriers they were encountering. But that was definitely not all that they did. For included in the experience portion, this student helped run programming, helped develop some programming around health and wellness for participants, and did some program evaluation for Special Olympics kind of in this area as well. So I think, zooming out a little bit, right, the capstone project and the question, right, sometimes can take on a pretty specific focus, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't other components of the capstone experience and addressing what the site needs and what's going on at that particular point in time. So I'm going to move on to the next example here. And again, there's a link to the final capstone project. If, again, that's of interest to kind of look at that a little bit more closely. But so this is an example of a question that really changed a little bit more throughout the process. This is an example of I think, a student who maybe, who started out with a question that and didn't have a specific site in mind. And so connecting with that site helped kind of form the question. So the initial question, again, developed in 771, among parents of children with developmental disabilities who display challenging behavior, what techniques have shown to be successful in developing parenting skills? So I think through then doing their initial literature research and the work in 771 led to some changes in, I think, more terminology than focus. I think the focus stayed the same, but how it was phrased changed a little bit based on the research that the student found. So we can see here in the literature review, the question has shifted a little bit to review the literature on this topic to establish what is the current evidence base on the topic of parent-mediated intervention to address challenging behavior in children with disabilities and related to occupational therapy practice. So you see some kind of, I would say, not significant changes, right? And so this is where they wrote their literature review. And so they got a lot of good foundational background in these parent-focused, parent-mediated interventions, for parents of children with disabilities, kind of focusing on some behavioral considerations. So really got a lot of good information here. Then we go to 773 and 774. So again, working on the proposal in the third year. And then the student got connected with a site. They ended up working with Go Baby Go Oregon. And so after connecting with that site and having conversations with that site, you can see some changes in their question. So then their proposal question was, how can early intervention therapists increase adherence to home programs for children with disabilities by supporting the development of parenting skills? So again, still a focus on, parents and parenting skills, and specifically parents of children with disabilities, a little less focus on the behavioral, right? I think that was certainly helpful information for the student, but they kind of broaden out a little bit, right? So it's more about kind of how can parents be partners in therapy, right? More looking at adherence to home programs. And because again, of kind of partnering with Go Baby Go, a focus on more of early intervention, that sort of thing. So you can kind of see how the question evolves as the, conversations with the site, what the site needs, can kind of then be bridged with what the work the student has done prior to this in preparation. So then if we move to the final project question. So this student ended up doing a small qualitative research project as part of their capstone. And this was in collaboration with the site. Go Baby Go was really interested in helping with this study. And so then there was a refined research question. What are parents' perceptions of their children's therapist as a resource for learning parenting skills? So again, you can see that there's still parenting skills, looking at, parents of children with disabilities, children who are receiving services, right? But really this understanding, again, I think as students kind of get into the actual implementation of their capstone, sometimes these questions start to emerge, right? So there was this acknowledgement that we really wanted to better understand the parent perspective on this, not just maybe like programs that therapists could use to increase adherence to home programs, but how are parents perceiving, right, their relationships with their therapist and how that related to parenting skills. So again, a lot of the same components, but you can just see how it kind of takes on a different shape based on, again, establishing that there was going to be a research project related to this and, input from the site and the other stakeholders. So again, just a quick note that the student did more than this research project, in their work for Go Baby Go, they and related to their original question too, right? They did do some work around creating materials that would support parents to carry over some Go Baby Go recommendations and programming at home. So really working on some parent resources and training materials, as well as some program evaluation for Go Baby Go to help them understand the specific, context of their organization and how they could better work with parents, again, to increase kind of that engagement at home and carryover of home programs. So I hope these examples have been helpful. Again, I just want to really reinforce that the question, again, if we go back up here, that you devise this semester is is really a starting point. It's not the end all be all. It's going to continue to evolve throughout the process, and that's okay. So as you get input from me, from other faculty, and down the road from sites and site mentors, it will continue to evolve, and you'll continue to kind of work with, you know, these questions. So I hope this is helpful, and I will see you all soon. Thanks.